Hello, everyone. Once again, Christian Metal Group is
Yeah.
back with another interview. Probably one of the most important ones that we've ever done. One of the most important ones that we'll ever do. We have with us the man. I would say the myth, the legend, but he's like right here in the flesh, like literally. I'm Jay Goodwin, aka Joel Lamal, and beside me, to my left or right, depending on how you're looking at this, is Dustin. He's also both of us are moderators for the Christian Metal Group. We've been all right. There he is. He's back, and like I said, once again with us we have Doug Van Pelt. Just as a brief introduction, off the top of the head, he is probably most infamous for two reasons. I'll say infamous and famous, or well known for two reasons. Number one, running a Christian hard music magazine for decades called Heaven's Metal. They changed their name to HM after a while, and then since then it's been some of both. Running that magazine, and then also as of about 20 years ago, he unmasked himself as the lead singer of a band called Lust Control. So he has other things that he's done with his time also, like radio shows and things like that. So we're going to get into all of that right now. So I'm going to let Dustin take it away with the first question, and we'll go from there.
What's up, guys? I'm Dustin. Doug, I was first introduced into you back as a ministry partner with Kuba the Demon Slayer with his Full Armor of God podcast. That was the first time I ever saw a picture of you and mention of you. But back in the 90s, I was a little kid. I'm a little bit younger than Jay. I was born in 87, so 2 months later, the first White Cross album came out. But I remember I was not allowed to buy Heaven's Metal and then eventually HM magazines until I was 10 years old, but my parents had to be with me in the Christian bookstores. And then Walmart opened the doors when I was in junior high and I could start buying them myself. So that's exciting. So starting all the way back in the 80s, because guys, if you don't know, Jay forgot to mention, we are doing a history tour of the entire Christian metal scene here at Christian Metal, and we really prayed about it. And me and Jay, Jay even more than I have, we've studied. I create playlists. We studied, and we're like, we want the man, the man that has used his talents for God and for the metal ministry. And so, Doug, that's why we called you. And so, just tell us a little bit about your testimony.
Okay. Well, I went forward to an altar call when I was 11 years old in 1974. And it was probably a sermon about the rapture, and you better get right with God, or you're going to get left behind. And I was born again at age 11. It was in June of 74. And the change was real. It was serious. I got to learn about worship, and I was reading the Bible and my Bible and starting to understand some things. I had the privilege of leading two of my best friends to Christ. I remember at one point saying, I want to carve your initials and the date on this tree out here because you accepted Christ out in the woods, And after about 6 months, though, I slowly but surely walked away from the Lord. And prior to that, though, in 72, I went to a big Jesus concert in Dallas called Explo 72. And there was a 1 to 200,000 people there. Larry Norman was there, Johnny Cash, and Chris Christopherson was on the bill actually too, as a seasonal artist. And but anyway, 74, I got born again. I slowly but surely walked away from the Lord, kind of became my own boss as a little 11-year-old, and I kept having to go to church. My parents, would take me to church every week, but for 9 years I was a prodigal son. I was kind of far away from the Lord in my heart. And I remember picking up rock and roll magazines like Circus and Cream, and learning about morality from fine theologians like Ted Nugent and Steven Tyler of Aerosmith.
Wow.
So I learned the power of rock journalism a little bit by being exposed to it. And then through high school, fell in love with heavy metal. With, I kind of went from like Kiss to Aerosmith and Led Zeppelin. Kind of graduated to Led Zeppelin. I thought was much higher form or class of rock and roll.
Mm-hmm.
And then the onset of heavy metal. Bands like Black Sabbath and Led Zeppelin were the pioneers, and Deep Purple too. I remember listening to Deep Purple from the grassroots when I was 6 or 7 years old. I would call the radio station and request the song "Temptation Eyes" by the Grassroots, and remember seeing the Led Zeppelin 3 album at a party that my older siblings were at, and was fascinated by that. So I always really liked rock and roll. Always liked electric guitars. Was exposed to a lot of it, and then in high school. Got into bands like Judas Priest when the Unleashed from the East album came out, and then when I discovered the Scorpions, and then shortly thereafter Iron Maiden, the Killers came out when I was still in high school, and AC/DC and Ozzy Osbourne and those bands. And I knew that because of having to go to church, and we lived in Southern California at the time, and my parents would go to Calvary Chapel down in Costa Mesa, and they would go to Maranatha Village, and they would see these Christian concerts. And I never went to any of those, I don't think, but I always knew there was Christian music because I was exposed to it as a youngster when I was a believer, but I just kind of shoved it aside and was really into my own kind of music. I went to college, was still crazy about rock music, and started to party. I was kind of an evangelist for a party, and I was one of those idiots that would roll down the window, "The party!" It's my car. And then at age 20, I was home for the summer in Florida where my parents lived. And one of my best friends who I'd met the previous summer working a job in installing insulation, he had gotten right with God over the school year and was really pursuing me as like an evangelistic convert. And he would pray for me. He would fast and pray for me. He would weep over the condition of my soul and prayer for me. And one night it all came to a head, and I kind of realized that I needed to make a decision. And I really didn't want to be like a wishy-washy Christian that would, accept Christ and then start smoking weed again or get drunk again or stumble again. So I really had to count the cost. And I was really like, do I really want to give this lifestyle up? I really enjoy being my own boss and everything. But the Lord broke my heart, and I remembered that Christians were really the happiest people on earth. And I was confronted by a verse in James 4:4 says, "You adulteresses, do you not know that friendship with the world is enmity toward God? Therefore, if you're a friend of the world, you're an enemy of God." I was like, I can't be on both sides of the fence. I got to choose. And my friend said, see that pen on the floor? That pen writes upside down, sideways in the water. I bet astronauts could use that pen. Here, I'm going to give you this pen. And I'd already thought in my mind, I need to write a resolution. I need to write a resolution to God that I was going to give up this lifestyle. And now I had the pen in my hand to write that resolution. I came home after leaving my friend's house with tears coming down my face, and praying to Jesus. And I came home, and the Bible I've been reading that day was shut on the kitchen dining room table. And there was a card sticking out of it. I thought, oh, isn't that sweet? My mom or dad must have written me a card. And I opened it up, and the card was blank. It was a card. So I had the paper and the pen. I was like, oh, wow, God is really orchestrating my steps. I need to write this resolution. But wait a minute. My two best friends from high school, Pat and Steve, they need to know Jesus. If they die, they'll go to hell because they don't know Jesus. I need to write to them. What do? I'm supposed to write the resolution, but I need to evangelize to my friends. That's really important. There's eternity is at stake. What do? And I opened up the Bible, the hunt and peck method, and I came right down on, don't worry about the speck in your brother's eye when you have a log in your own. First, take care of the speck in your own eye. Then you can see clearly. Take the log out of your own eye, and you can see clearly the speck out of your brother's eye. So there was my answer. So I wrote the resolution, got right with God, and it was serious. The next day, I told my dad about it. He showed me his prayer list for me. He'd been praying for me every day of my life, and he still does. He'd been praying for a Christian friend, and that's exactly what God used to bring me back to him. So then I slowly but surely started gobbling up as much Christian rock as I could and discovering some stuff that I really liked. Phil Keaggy and Red Band and Kansas, Sweet Comfort Band. Those were like the 5 albums I got, and then Carrie Different solo album, Seeds of Change, as a Christmas gift the previous year. So, started buying what I could and learning more about it. And so that's my testimony in a nutshell.
That's cool. I love it, man. So let's talk
Beautiful.
about actually starting this magazine. I had a later question, but I'm gonna go on and talk about it now since we're talking about the beginnings of the magazine. Striper, and I think it was Ozfox specifically, was the first band that you had on in Heaven's Metal, and I want you to just elaborate on how that came to be, just the magazine itself, and then about Striper. We're gonna talk about the evolution of Striper soon too, and what happened next. But yeah, what I was gonna say what possessed you, but yeah, what made you think to include Striper as the first band to have on the cover of the magazine, and just talk about that a little bit, and just how
Okay.
and even how it grew.
Well, when I came back to school for the University of Texas in the fall of '83, and the student newspaper there called the Daily Texan, when there was like 50,000 undergraduates at that university, and so the newspaper had a big circulation, and they would let any student write for the newspaper, and so I started writing Christian rock album reviews, like a Rick Kua album, Leslie
Really?
Phillips album,
Yeah.
some of the other albums I did, and then in the summer of '84, the next summer break, I went to LA and lived with my grandparents. I got to see Stryper at Radio City Station in Anaheim, California, before the Yellow and Black Attack had come out. And I was
Oh,
there at the Village, a big Christian bookstore in Santa Ana that had like a big 10-year anniversary celebration. And Stryper was there. They showed up in a limousine, and they had boxes of their Yellow and Black Attack hot off the press, straight from the record plant. These were black vinyl. This was before the yellow vinyl came out. So I bought Yellow and Black Attack on the first day it was available. And so I spent that summer, got to see a bunch of Christian rock concerts like Daryl Mansfield and Stryper play. And so I came back to school, was writing more Christian rock album reviews. And Stryper went on a tour to Texas. It was their first outside of California tour, the first time they ever got in a band really tour. And they came to like Corpus Christi, Houston, San Antonio, Austin, and Dallas. And so for the Austin show, their publicist, Rick Orienza at Enigma Records, had contacted the school newspaper about doing some pre-show press on the band. And I had written their Yellow and Black Attack album for the paper. And the guy who managed the music section asked me if I would do an interview with this band, like for the day of the show, have an article on Stryper. So I did. This is one of the questions you asked me earlier, talking about getting into journalism, the first interviews I did and whatnot. This is what really got that rolling. So I did an interview with Robert Sweet, where I recorded the interview and I transcribed the words that he said, and I put it into a feature article format where I described this band and added quotes and used quotes to flavor the article. So the day of the Stryper concert in Austin, there was an article in the Daily Texan about the band, and so that was like my first feature article I ever wrote about a rock band. I had
wow.
came upon the idea of starting a Christian heavy metal magazine that winter, right around that time. And I was reading an underground zine called ACME, which is an acronym that stood for Alternative Christian Music Enthusiasts. And they mentioned news about some metal band, and they said, with the advent of Christian metal, somebody should start a Christian metal fanzine. You could have a lot of fun along the way. And I thought, I can do that. And I kind of sparked the idea. I told my friends about it, told my parents about it, and started praying about it, formulating a business plan for it. And so I decided, okay, I'm going to do this. And so it was getting to be summer of '85, and my friend Carrie Womack, who later went on to be the lead singer for a band called One Bad Pig, he said, I'm going to the Corner Festival. Why don't you print your first issue of your magazine and I'll hand it out as a promotion? So that was the push out the front door that I got that actually got me to start printing an issue. And I used photographs I took of that show at the Austin Opera House of Oz Fox playing with a lollipop in his mouth. And then I had a picture of Oz and Mike playing lead guitars at the same time. Then had a picture of Robert Sweet, the drummer, on there. There's 3 photos in that first issue. It was 6 pages long, and all 3 photos were Stryper. So that was the start of Heaven's Metal magazine. My vision was always one day it'll be on the bookshelves next to Circus, Hit Parader, and Cream. And in 1985, it was a year of starting magazines. Metal Edge, Spin, Alternative Press, and Heaven's Metal all started in the summer of 1985. And I think the first issue of Spin had an article on Stryper in it, coincidentally enough. And so I always envisioned it was going to be a full-blown magazine But even though I had no investment capital, this was just Xerox cut and paste fanzine style publication. But I only grew as I could afford to grow. So I took out advertisements in other zines. I took out an ad in CCM, and I took out an ad in the secular magazine Kerrang. And it just happened that that classified ad was going to be in issue number 100, which was going to be the first issue. They were going to print an extra 100,000 copies in the United States, as well as the United Kingdom and Europe. And so my classified ad happened to be in that issue. So anyway, subscriptions started rolling in. Before long, I had 300 subscribers, and it just kept multiplying and growing from there. So it's kind of fun to see it start. I always had a dream that it would be like a full color magazine one day, but it certainly didn't look that way for a few years. It's all black and white and Xerox copy stuff.
All right, your turn, Dustin.
So I guess I'll ask, during that time after you interviewed Striper, what was going on in the Christian world that was affected by the non-Christian secular world? Like, did you get a lot of pushback, or were you seeing it? Like, were you experiencing it?
Well, back in the mid 80s, the whole Christian rock debate was, is this of God or is it not? And so that debate was raging on. And people thought that people with long hair or men dressed like women that had eyeliner on, so you could see their eyes in the stage lights, and the poofy hair, the tight spandex pants, and all that stuff. And just the heavy music in general, and the loud drums and everything, was controversial. But I didn't really get in a lot of those fights. I didn't go looking for those fights. I did an interview with Steve Baker a couple weeks ago, and he was one of the guys that used to manage PFR, and he managed this club in Minneapolis called the New. And he brought up something when I mentioned this same topic, was that when I started, I was hitting an audience that was hungry for what I had to deliver. So, the people that I was reaching with Heaven's Metal, and it was exploding and growing, those were the people who liked Christian metal. Those are the ones that latched onto it. So a bunch of angry parents who didn't understand it or didn't think it was godly, they weren't really privy to Heaven's Metal magazine. They weren't seeing it, or they weren't contacting me, because if I wanted to go looking for a fight, I had some ammunition. I could argue my points and stuff, and I just never went looking for the fight. So didn't have to face a lot of it, but it was certainly out there. This rock and roll was getting legit in the Christian circles, and there were like true artists making good art in the name of Christ, and it was freaking some people out. And in some of the people in the world, like when I would put up flyers for Christian rock shows in Austin, I would put up my flyer on a telephone pole, and 10 minutes later, it would be covered by somebody else's flyer, or it'd be torn down. There was some resistance in some parts, but funny enough, the punk rock scene in Austin, they respected Christian rock. They were like, you have something to say? Well, we have something to say. Punk rock is all about saying things. And you're going to get your time, and we get our time. They might yell at you and spit beer at you when you're preaching from the stage, but they still let you have your moment. And so the punk rockers kind of accepted Christian rock, Christian punk much quicker than some of the more mainstream type audiences did.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it seems that as the magazine grew and people started, I guess, latching on to it as far as fans of metal, it seemed like, of course, things grew both with publication and with the amount of bands that were being discovered, the amount of bands that were forming. Here in this space, I'll talk about let's talk about Sanctuary and your relationship with Sanctuary, because I know the Sanctuary on your end was publication, but on Sanctuary's end was mentoring. What was your relationship like with Bob Beeman and the Sanctuary group?
Super good friends with Bob. Met with him numerous times through the years. Like when I would go to Los Angeles, I would meet with him and stuff, as well as go to the record company offices and stuff like that. The Sanctuary movement, as you probably know, was started just for follow-up, as these people that were Christians, they were rock and rollers. They were seeing a bunch of people getting saved at these Striper concerts. Striper was just having massive success, reaching people for Christ, and people were praying the sinner's prayer, getting saved, but there was no follow-up. And so people like Jim Laverty, who was in Barren Cross, and some other folks like Bob Beeman said, we need to really start a serious follow-up ministry so these kids can get discipled, so they wouldn't just become Christians that fall away. Like the parable Jesus told about the sowers of the seeds of the gospel. If it falls in shallow soil, it springs up quickly, but the heat of the day and stuff, kills it off. And so being discipled would be watering that seed and helping people grow. And so that's how Sanctuary started. They had the hotline, like a 1-800 number, in the Sanctuary church that gathered and grew. They had a bunch of people that would meet. And there was 2 Sanctuary churches initially, one in North Hollywood, there was one in Redondo Beach, California. And they had enough people that were part of that. They were volunteering. They would man the 1-800 lines and would counsel people. And they also tapped into the 700 Club counseling lines at the time.
Wow.
Help people who were dealing with drug addiction or suicide or whatever. And also they had these rad studies where they would do Bible studies, and people could sign up and get Bible studies in the mail, and they could get sermons on cassette tape and hear and grow in Christ. And so it was all just kind of a pure-hearted effort to disciple people and to not only lead them to Christ, but show them how to follow Christ and walk with Christ. And so in the Sanctuary, like Heaven's Metal too, would put little inserts or advertisements in a lot of the cassettes or albums that would come out. And you could find out more information because it was in that you just tear it off and mail it into Sanctuary or put it into Heaven's Metal to subscribe. One of the things about Heaven's Metal is I got in on the ground floor of a movement, Christian heavy metal, and that movement exploded. And so I exploded with the movement. So it's kind of a real blessing to be there at the beginning and grow with it.
Wow.
That's cool. One question for you, Doug. I guess looking back now from that entire decade and all that music and that you were helping with Sanctuary and everything, what were some bands that you wish would have made more music?
Of Angels would be the first one out of it. They only made one album, and it was a controversial album. Like a controversy with them. They recorded by all the major Christian labels. Excuse me, making some broccoli here in the house for the family. But Angels, I would love to hear more music from them. Messiah Prophet only had 2 albums, and
they should
have heard more of them. Daryl Mansfield was like a West Coast guy. He was like a rock and roll evangelist that Calvary Chapel kind of had on staff, and he played concerts all the time. They would play schools in Southern California, play churches, and all kinds of places. And he was very prolific and had a real mastery of the blues and the harmonica, and had a pretty good guitar player with him named Eric. And he came out with a fair number of albums, but it would have been cool to see him explore. And one of the things he joked around with me about, or kind of dreamed about out loud, was they really wanted to do a Whitesnake thing. He could have pulled that off. I wish they would have done a Whitesnake album, stylistically, because he had just a great melodic blues infused voice.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting that you mentioned Daryl Mansfield. My next question was actually going to be, and we'll talk about this change from Heaven's Metal to HM. But just as a side note, there was a Heaven's Metal and HM. They did tend to, I think one thing I really appreciated about you all is that you all talked a lot about the roots of metal, especially with blues. And I know you all mentioned people like Rosetta Tharpe and Blind, especially I think Blind Willie Johnson got a lot of mentions in Heaven's Metal. And some of these blues artists and some of these gospel artists, there was always, it seemed to be a big appreciation for gospel. I remember even Jeff Sheets, when he was naming his top 10 list of metal artists for when I think you all did a 10th anniversary magazine issue. I actually remember this, and he actually mentioned Take Six, who was one of my favorite groups, as one of his biggest influences for the year. But I always thought that was really cool. But with Daryl Mansfield, I remember there was like a big blues explosion. Of course, Glenn Kaiser, Larry Howard. And so Glenn Kaiser, Daryl Mansfield, and Larry Howard, they were at the forefront of that movement. I even remember they did an album together at Cornerstone back in '94. I wasn't there. I wish I could have been there, but I remember hearing the CD like years later, and they had like all kind of people there, like Jesse Dixon and just all these gospel artists. So yeah, I know that when you all changed over to HM, it seemed like you all started including a lot more alternative artists and things, and of course we saw more blues. Glenn Kaiser, of course, had released his phenomenal Spontaneous Combustion by this time. I remember seeing that advertisement in HM, and just a bunch of other stuff. So yeah, so this changed though, and also so it's like almost a twofold thing that just looking at the other genres that may have influenced metal, and also I mean even things like Heaven's Hip Hop. I remember there being a couple of mentions of hip hop in the magazine, but also just overall switching over to HM. Like how big was that like for you all, like in your mind? I know that it became huge like way later, but were you all thinking like this nobody's gonna notice, but I know it also even like the times in which it happened, because like metal, once Nirvana came out with their album and once like Metallica stopped doing thrash metal, it seemed like metal took such a big turn towards alternative music. So yeah, so it's just so much. So let's just talk about that whole period.
Okay. So when 1995 came around, that's when I changed the magazine from Heaven's Metal to HM. But prior to that, I was doing some video magazines. There were these video cassette, VHS cassettes by this mainstream called Hard and Heavy. It was like a video magazine or a variety show for heavy metal on videotape. So I started doing Heaven's Metal video magazines. Volume 1 had Stryper and Guardian on it, and Volume 2 had Barren Cross on it. Anyway, I was putting together Volume 3, and I needed somewhere to do my editing. And so Frontline Records, which was located in Newport Beach, California at the time, they had a video editing suite. They had this thing called a video toaster, where I had this little lever which would switch from camera A to camera B, and it would kind of transition on screen, and you could do graphics and titles and stuff. So I traded some advertising space in Heaven's Metal magazine with them so I could spend a weekend after hours, like midnight and beyond, like all night, editing video at their offices. So I was in there one night editing videos, and Michael Sean Black, one of the A&R guys and guys that helped run the label there, he came in and he said, Doug, you should change the name of your magazine to HM.
Oh.
And it's funny. I didn't really use blue language at the time. Sometimes it's fun to use blue language to crack a joke or whatever between the other believers and whatnot. But I wanted to cuss him out so bad when he said that. All right, I kept my mouth shut. I was offended because Heaven's Metal was like the perfect name, come down from heaven. Heaven's Metal.
Yeah.
I was just like, it was the best name, perfect for this movement, perfect for this magazine. I thought to change that name is ridiculous. But around that same time, heavy metal had died a commercial death. Nirvana had hit with the Nevermind album in '91. Entire record labels had dismantled their metal division.
Wow.
Radio stations had dropped their metal format. Record stores had taken their metal sections and eliminated them or made them really, really small and made them punk. And so metal was the bad word in the name Heaven's Metal. And so I had to, back in the day, we sold $30,000 of advertising in every issue of Heaven's Metal.
Wow.
And that helped pay for our print bill and our postage bill, which was about 10 grand. Wow. And so I had to think about advertising, well, if my advertising is going to start dropping off because we have the word metal in our name. And a lot of our readers were calling us HM anyway, because people from Australia and Great Britain, they abbreviate things. Like they call university, I go to uni. And on the weekend, I'm going to go home and see my relatives. Instead of relatives, I'm going to see my relatives. And so they would write to the editor and say, the new issue of HM was blah, blah, blah. I thought, if I shortened it to HM, it could still be Heaven's Metal. And so as a business decision I made, it was very hard to do. I prayed a lot about it, and it was kind of scary. But I did it. And so the 10th anniversary issue of Heaven's Metal, which you mentioned, had a gatefold cover, and it showed all 53 previous covers of the magazine, the little thumbnails across it. That was the last issue of Heaven's Metal. So the issue after that, the September, October issue, I had a new logo. It's an oval, and it had a lowercase h and a lowercase m, and it said Your Hard Music Authority, which I started using underneath the Heaven's Metal logo a couple years before that. In the little tiny letters above the oval, it said Heaven's Metal. So I had a transition for the last two issues of 95. It had the HM logo that said Heaven's Metal above HM. So that could tell people visually, hey, it's still Heaven's Metal, it's just shortened HM. And so the transition, so when 1996 rolled around, the January issue, which had Michael Sweet of Stryper on the cover, it was HM with no Heaven's Metal on the top. And anyway, the backlash that I got from metalheads was hard to deal with because they felt like I had betrayed an entire genre. I turned my back on metal. And we were still covering metal. We were just broadening our scope. And we still majored on the electric guitar, the distortion that comes from, Marshall amp and the electric guitar. That was still kind of the music. That was what the filter we used. We did do some broader stuff like lo-fi and college rock became popular. And some of that was acoustic based or electronic based. And we spread our coverage a little bit. But it was hard music. It was music that had an edge to it. And but that transition was rough, and we really felt the backlash from metalheads that felt like we turned our back on them for a while. And I think they eventually came around because the magazine kept growing.
Wow.
Do you have any questions for him at this point, Jay?
Oh man, I got a few actually. Let's see. So let's talk about So and So Says. Yeah, so I thought about this like not too long before the interview because I remember this is just so funny. Of course, we are moderators for this Christian metal group, and the group has grown, especially since like 2021. So I think we had like at the beginning of 2021, we may have had like 18,000 members. Now we're like at 37,000 and growing.
That's
like,
awesome.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy. But with this amount of people joining, we have a lot of people that just were not around or have totally forgotten that maybe they got Alzheimer's or something. I don't know. But anyway, they've forgotten a lot of the past of Christian metal. So one thing that came up in the group recently was that somebody accused HM of selling it out for having secular interviews. And I'm like, you just must not have been around this time because almost every issue of HM has had a secular interviews with secular artists. I definitely finally remember interviews by, with Kirk Hammett and, Sepultura, Max, and even some of these people I remember. Max is one of the ones I really remember because you all talked about faith in his interview. And, he was saying in that he was a believer. So there was a lot of secular artists that you interviewed and actually found out they were either believers or like, somewhere along that line or had been raised in Christian homes and maybe had some level of faith. And I was telling the people that were protesting about this, I'm like, Doug even has at least two books that are full of those interviews. So what made you think to start including secular interviews, of secular artists in the magazine, which I thought were very amazing, by the way. But what brought that about?
That was inspired by Cornerstone Magazine. The people that put on the Cornerstone Festival, which was Jesus People USA, a big community in Chicago that still exists today. They had a magazine that came out you could subscribe to for free or for whatever you could afford. And they interviewed Ozzy Osbourne. And during the interview, they said, here's a copy of Mere Christianity by C.S. Lewis. I encourage you to read it. Help answer some of your questions about faith or whatever skeptics have. And I thought that is really cool. And at the time, Heaven's Metal was growing so much that I was on the radar of normal record labels like Epic Records, Columbia Records, Atlantic Records. I would get press kits from them about bands that they had coming out. And so all I had to do was say, because in the press kit was like an 8x10 glossy photo with the phone number of the record label at the bottom and the record label's logo. There would be a bio about the band, specifically about this album. and a copy of their CD or vinyl or cassette or whatever. And so all I had to do, the purpose for that media kit to be sent to me was, we want coverage. We want coverage in your magazine. You're either a newspaper, radio station, or magazine. And I was just one of those magazines on their radar. All I had to do was say, yes, I'd like to interview this person. And so the publicist was more than happy to set it up. And I always started including 2 questions back to back. And they usually came out of left field. They weren't expected. Like we were talking about their videos or maybe race cars or whatever. Then I asked them, what do you think about Jesus Christ? And asked them, what do you think about religion? You know, let's talk about the religious baggage in your life. I said, what do you think about Jesus, the person? So, and I followed that up with, what do you think about its claims to be, quote, the way, the truth, and the light? No one comes to the Father but by me, end quote. And so I would always do that. And sometimes they were face to face, usually they were over the phone, but sometimes they were face to face. I would use like the quote marks to let them know that, you know, hey, I'm open to the idea, or at least I'm going to not be dogmatic in my language to force feed my ideas or my thoughts and my beliefs on you. I'm going to throw it out there like it's a philosophy, or like Jesus apparently did say this quote. What do you think about that quote? So it disarms the listener a little bit when you don't come across so much as saying, I know this is the truth. If you believe a lie, you're going to listen to me and you're going to convert to Christ on the spot. Without that kind of attitude, saying things like, you know, what do you think about his quote? You know, and people would open up about it. And a lot of times they would, like Sammy Hagar, say, what the hell are you trying to do to me, Doug? Make me think? You know, and people enjoyed it because a lot of these rock stars, they're in a record company office, they're in a hotel room, and the publicist has set up 5 interviews for them, 30 minutes long, back to back to back to back to back. And you know, as well as I do, that most of those questions from newspaper reporters and other magazines are going to be the same questions over and over again. So when I come out of left field or I bring up something that's interesting to them, they actually would enjoy talking about it because it was not the norm. It gave them something else to focus on. So, and it quickly became the most popular part of our magazine. People would always wonder, is it Kevin's Metal came in the mail today? I wonder who they interviewed this time. Wow, living color. What did Corey Glover say? You know, and people said, hey, Doug, you should publish a book with these interviews. So I did. Relevant Books published Rock Stars on God, Volume 1. It was always thought it would be a series. And Relevant Books went out of print, out of business a couple years later. And then so I got released from my book contract with them since they didn't exist anymore. Wow. And put out Volume 2. And Volume 1 had Henry Rollins and Kiss and Metallica. Yeah. Alice Cooper, all the bigger names. But I knew that bigger names don't always equal the better stories or the better reads. Right. And so I handpicked 25 artists for Volume 2. I handpicked the best interviews because some of these were just really juicy and really exciting, really fun to do. And I still got Volume 3 and Volume 4 kind of in the can, and I plan to release someday, but I just always seem to be too busy to crank those out. But then you'll see Def Leppard and some of those bands, some of the hair bands, the secular scene will be in Volume 3 or 4. Yeah. All right. Fun stuff.
Yeah, that's an awesome thing. You got another question? I got a few more for sure.
Yeah, I got another question. I guess this is going now into the 2000s. Because I haven't read very much of your articles during that time, Doug. So if you repeat yourself, I apologize. I am not sure of the umbrella of everything you guys covered back then, but what were your thoughts on just obviously metalcore was in slow creation, core was now a thing, punk music was coming back, there was slight ska, hip hop was changing, metal was changing and kind of coming back, and things were being influenced by different bands, especially I would say like the new metal and the alternate metal. What were your thoughts on just the infusion styles of like thrash and hip hop coming together, and then just like when rap became a thing, but they started having some beats that were kind of metal in there? What were your thoughts on that in the Christian music scene?
Yeah, I loved it from the get-go. Prior to that, the precursor to some of that metalcore stuff was the fusion and the hybridization of styles like industrial and metal, like bands like Circle of Dust. And then like Faith No More came out with a little bit of, funk and groove to come metal. And so, and then XL and DVD came out with an album. Featured The Crucified. It was just great music. And, hip hop is kind of like the music of the streets, and heavy metal is the music of the streets. Hardcore punk is the music of the streets or the alleyways. And they they fit because they're raw, they're energetic. They have bold messages, so it fit for Christianity to be talking about hard truth and whatnot. And then of course the hardcore and metal fusing together. The hardcore bands were getting bigger, chunkier riffs in their music, and the metal bands that were infusing hardcore and stuff in vocalizations with their metal riffs. It was just a really good marriage. And what was cool about some of those bands like Zao and Under Oath is that they were pioneering, and they were actually influencing secular bands that were listening to their albums and hearing new music. And so Christians weren't just copying the music of the day, innovating. And in the world will come and tell you, people like Every Time I Die might bring up Zao in an interview and tell you, they will testify how some of these bands were doing something new and different and bold. And so they were leading the way, which was really exciting, because a lot of us Christians would complain or talk about how we wished we could be more innovative and not copycat. And so we did it. And it's really cool to say that, and specifically in the metalcore scene, that happened in a big way. And some of these bands went on big tours, and it really got big in the 2000s. It was fun to be a part of.
Yeah.
Awesome. That's cool. So I guess seeing all of that scene of the 2000s and just everything infused with each other, Christian music and non-Christian music, what was going on? Because a lot of this time was when like the late 2000s and early 2010s was when a lot of those Christian bands kind of said, we're no longer a Christian band. Like, how, like, you being on the forefront, how did that affect you? Like, what was going on? Like, how were you guys as a team, as a ministry, as a magazine company, like trying to like understand what was going on?
Yeah, there was definitely like a growing chasm or growing division between ministry band and art sake. And for years, a lot of us Christians had been influenced by people like Francis Schaeffer, this guy Rookmacher, and which talked about being innovative. Like we just talked about bands like Zao being innovative and doing something creative, because God is the creator of the universe. And so that kind of motivates us to be creative and not just be a copycat. Like we take a shirt and take the Reese's logo and make the Reese's say Jesus. It's kind of funny. And for some people, it's innocent and it's a way for them to testify about Jesus. But for other people, it makes them sick. It's like, my God is not a piece of chocolate. My God is creative, and you're just doing a copycat. And it might be illegal to use their logo, you know? So there's sides to that story. And for years, we had been pushing Christian artists to take their ideas to the marketplace of ideas, meaning take your music out into the mainstream and let people who need to know Jesus hear it and hear your message. Because playing to youth groups is a really good thing. And remind me about that later if I don't bring it up later on my own, about the pastoral gift of Christian rock. You know, keeping Christians Christian and helping them be edified, that's a big deal. I've kind of covered it there. But reaching the lost, because a lot of people have gotten saved through Christian rock because they like rock music and they hear the message in a way they can relate to it, because they might turn off a preacher on TV, but they hear this music and the song, why not? It sticks with them and somehow changes their heart. And so we would encourage our own scene, our own bands to go out and spread the word and take your ideas to the marketplace of ideas and let your idea stand or fall based on the strength of that idea. Not just because everybody agrees with your message, but whether your ideas, your art is good. And finally, that started to happen. But some of the people that were doing this for Jesus, deep down in their hearts, I think, and I'm being a little judgmental here, but I think a little bit of judgmentalism set in their hearts. So like, these people aren't singing about Jesus. They're denying Jesus. They're Jesus. They're Satan. They're the devil. They're wrong. They flew off the plot. And they just went off the deep end. They started off with, I'm doing this for Christ, but these people aren't doing it like me. They must be wrong. And that judgmental spirit takes them all the way to accusing them of being Judas. Like these bands are becoming Judas. They're turning their backs on Christ because their songs might be about relationships instead of about the four spiritual laws or Jesus. So anyway, so that argument became, and that divide kept growing and growing. And for the people, some of the people just dug into their trenches and said, it's ministry music or it's worldly. I don't want to talk to you. I don't want to, there's a sort of divide happened. And then the bands that were taking their art to the marketplace of ideas, they were like Anne Berlin, The Devil Wears Prada, Under Oath.
Yeah.
Even bands like Paramore were going out and exploding. And of course, some of these people being in their early 20s were not grounded in the faith, maybe, or maybe they were faced with temptation. They took drugs or they sinned. God forbid they fell. But some of them actually maintained their integrity, took their art out into the world, and it was accepted and it grew, and it was a really cool thing. And so because HM covered all of those bands, we gave fair coverage to the ministry bands and the bands that were there art for art's sake. And the two people on either side didn't really like each other. And so that still exists today. And
yes, it does.
That's kind of what I saw when it was happening. And it was just, I knew it was just going to get worse and worse. And in some ways, I think the fact that Christian rock went into the mainstream, I kind of educated people out of the reason to have a Christian magazine. Because now Anne Berlin and Under Oath were getting major coverage in alternative press. Why did they need HM? And so I joke about it. It's probably not a real factor, but maybe a tiny factor that because we always pushed for that, get your art out there, maybe that hurt us in a way. Because, HM has always been, a Christian magazine, but, we also helped people wrestle with that whole, what is Christian art, and do we have to have Christian art? Can it just be art? And if I'm a Christ follower, that's going to come out in my art. And I was like, yeah, that's cool. I like that. And so we promoted that, and we don't exist anymore, at least in print.
Right, dude. It's so funny when you were saying all this. It reminds me, those arguments definitely exist today. Like every other day, it's somebody in our group, quite a few people in our group, discuss these issues. We have a lot of Christian gatekeepers for sure. We have so the group is awesome, and we have a lot of awesome people, but there are definitely some people that try to be gatekeepers for sure, and they feel like it's nothing is Christian enough for them. If it isn't, it's almost like they have their own preference, and whatever doesn't meet up to their personal standards isn't Christian. Now that's pretty weird to say that. Or to think like that, but it is what it is. Okay, so HM and Heaven's Metal had a lot of articles that were really good, a lot of columns, different people writing different people writing columns. I remember Pastor Bob's for sure. The Christian in Art, I remember that one. Was that Kemper Crab that did that?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm trying to think of who else, but there were quite a few people that did them. But and then there were also like these issues that talked about various subjects. I think one of the biggest ones that I remember was the issue about cursing.
Oh yeah.
And there was like a big article dedicated to that, and there was also a series on a couple of other things, and I'm trying to remember. But yeah, that issue about cursing was hilarious. So I'd like to talk about what issues of the magazine and what subjects got the most feedback when it comes to like mail, things like that.
That's a good question. The cussing article was a big deal. We had some ads from Gibson Guitars, a mainstream guitar company, started
Yeah.
getting some ads. And there was a shot of this guy that was a musician carrying his guitar, and there was a girl with like a flannel shirt on, and she was looking back at the camera. I think she had short pants on.
Oh.
And that was like, the musician's going to get the girl, and I got some rabid, angry letters over that. Keeping us selling out to sex appeal or whatever. And then sometimes, a bad review would cause a lot of stink in the letters to Ed. But the letters to Ed was, back in the day.
Yeah, letters to Ed. Yeah.
We had that a regular feature. We had a bunch of letters to go through for each issue. Try to pick which ones we should run with.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I remember some of those reviews were really cool. I remember one of the reviews that really, really stuck out to me for sure was the Zale review when Where Blood and Fire Bring Rest came out, because it was such a, you were talking earlier about innovative bands, and Zale was definitely one of those very innovative bands. And I remember, like, I had heard, in fact, I still have like those Zale CDs from when some of those, like before, like when Sean Jonas was the lead singer, and Eric, trying to think of Eric, I forgot his last name right now, but yeah, Eric was the lead singer for a while. So I had those, but I didn't really pay much attention to them. But I remember reading HM, and like I would read HM and Heaven's Metal a lot for like the reviews to see what CDs I needed to buy. And Where Blood and Fire for sure was one of those. And I just remember them talking about them kind of going for a very, very metal, even black metal almost influence vocal style with Dan doing that. But yeah, that was really, really, really cool stuff. So are there bands, just speaking of like letters to the Ed also, and the reviews and stuff, so I'll talk about our group. So we probably have I would say a holy trinity, but it's more like 4 bands. It's Demon Hunter, Striper, Skillet, and Theocracy. Those are like the big 4 groups that can do no wrong in the Christian metal group, for better or for worse.
Yeah.
Are there some bands that really stuck out to Heaven's Metal and HM that you all got like a lot of letters about, or people were just constantly asking for coverage from them for?
Yeah, well, Tourniquet and Deliverance never seemed to do anything wrong. Just came out with great album after great album. And Vengeance Rising was so amazing. It seems like they only had 2 albums out, but they really released 4 albums because Vengeance Rising did a couple. On the Earth and Destruction Comes.
And
then I don't know. It's hard to answer that question, not have your own influences, your own favorites come up.
Right.
But, there's definitely and then when Disciples started to crank up and just release a lot of good material and come out with an album just about every year, their fans were really supportive of the band.
Yeah.
But yeah, it seems like we got the occasional bad letter. We got some weird letters from people that seem to be out of their mind, but most of it was like fan mail and really appreciating what somebody said or some new album that came out that they really liked.
Yeah. All right. So dang, a few more questions. Heaven's Metal and HM used to for their subscribers, you all would have these CD samplers that came. And I still own a lot of them actually to this day. What inspired that, and what labels did you end up partnering with different labels to do stuff, or people just like sending you a bunch of stuff?
I can't remember what started it. A lot of record companies would do samplers on cassette, like Sanctuary started doing these things with Frontline Records called Hot Metal Summer.
Yeah.
Volumes 1, 2, 3, and 4, and they would have interviews with the bands and play some of their singles. And they were giving away free at stores. So you go into a store and you get this free music usually it's like albums that were coming out in the future or had just been released. They were promoting what you could actually go out and buy.
Mhm.
And there's some other publications probably did samplers every once in a while, but I think it was around 96, maybe or maybe even as late as 98. We just came up with a price. It was like $400. You could have your band be a sampler CD, and we had a screening process, like because there was so many signed artists in every issue of the magazine. We had about 36 album reviews in our signed album review section, and we had this thing called Pick of the Litter, which we whittled it down to about 12 of the best unsigned bands. But so every community in America, every major city, and even suburbs had Christian bands, and some of them were not very good. Some of them were pretty good. Some of them were awesome. Some of them were incredible. Some of them obviously got signed based on their demos and their independent releases. So we had a screening process, and we would invite people to be on the sampler. You had to kind of pass our test of quality.
Right.
You would get like an email or a phone call and say, if we, if you want to be on it, it's $400. We're going to send it out to 5,000 people. That was our subscriber base at the time, in addition to retail sales. So it's only subscribers that got the sampler CD. The ones in the bookstores didn't have CDs. And so we would say, send us your photos, send us your bio, and we'll do like a screensaver program. When you put the CD in your computer, it would actually open up this like a web page. If you read about all the 15 bands on that CD, and all you could do a screensaver program. We could have the band's photo, go up on the screen and then switch to the next band. And that became really, really popular. And it was not very hard to sell 15 slots at $400 each for that CD, which is about $6,000, I guess, which would pay for this sampler and the mailing and profit magazine and help the magazine out. And so that was fun. And I remember some really great songs, like one band that comes to mind, the song "Shelter Me" by Balance of Power. I don't know if you heard that, but it's a killer. He put that same song on 2 or 3 samples, and I never got tired of it. It's such a killer, epic power metal song. But there was some really, and every once in a while I would throw in like a bonus track, like a friend of mine's band, like because we could fit 18 songs on there, so we'd throw in a couple extras. And but that was a fun feature, and it lasted as long as the magazine was in print. We had CDs to go with it. And then when the magazine, right when it went out of print, which was at the end of 2011, the internet and Napster and everything had changed the format so much that people were getting music online in MP3s anyway. But it was a great run. The magazine lasted 28 years in print.
Yeah, that's I remember one of the most significant things that I remember from the samplers was discovering the new at that time incarnation of Extol. I remember Extol being on the Northern Lights compilation back in '96, but in I think it was like '99, they had released Burial, and Reflections of a Broken Soul, like I said, was on one of the samplers, and I was like, wow, this is Extol. And of course, by the time Ula had joined the band and he was singing on that track, and I was like, this is like so different from anything that I had heard. Very unique metal project like Burial was overall. There is an album that you all did as HM called The Mother of All Tribute Albums. So, and of course it had like different bands, different artists paying tribute to their favorite artists, some secular, some Christian. I remember Tourniquet being on there doing Dogman. I remember King's X, Doug doing I Will Follow by You Too. So let's talk about that a little bit. And then I'm going to turn it over to Dustin for a couple questions.
It was a sweet project. It has my mom's face on the cover. Saddam Hussein said that the Iraqi war is going to be the mother of all battles. So the mother of all whatever was like a slogan at the time. I decided this would be like the ultimate tribute album because each artist gets to pick who they want to tribute. It's not a Beatles tribute or a Zeppelin tribute. It's all these bands, like 15 different bands covering 15 other bands. I had Larry Norman covering DC Talk's Jesus Freak, which was a brilliant idea.
That was great.
Up with Larry on the spot in Nashville one time. But so I just reached out to them and said, would you do this as a kind of a fundraiser for HM Magazine? You know, you retain the rights to your songs, and I had a record company at the time, you know, HM Records, and distribution and whatnot, which didn't work out too well. The distribution company kind of went out of business too soon.
Mm-hmm.
But that was great. Some of those songs, like Reflescent Tide, was a new upcoming alternative rock band, and they did a song "Hold Me Jesus" by Rich Mullins, which was really, really sweet. The Violet Burning did a Beatles cover, and it was just a fun project. And I had each artist send me a picture of their mother, and we put that photo of their mother in the liner notes of the CD, so you could, you know, and with information about the song and whatnot. So that was a lot of fun. It was, I really liked it, and I still have hundreds of copies. So we might promote that with this video podcast thing.
Okay. Awesome.
You can get.
Awesome. I got a question to piggyback you, Jay. Since Jay's been asking about, like, I guess what the fans were asking back then, or even now, because I'm not sure what you're doing now, Doug, and whatever that is, I definitely want to follow. I want to listen if you're doing podcasts. We'll get those in the links so Jay can put that in the video and the messages. But me and Jay, we're going to be doing on our separate videos, we're going to be researching and looking at album art. Over the years, what would you say was the most talked about in the magazine as lyrics and album art by different bands?
That's a good question. I'm glad you brought that up. When I used to do every year, I did the readers poll. The November-December issue would always be the readers poll ballot. And one of the questions, besides favorite singer, favorite drummer, favorite bassist, favorite guitar player, was favorite album cover. And I had favorite songwriter, favorite lyricist was one too. And we would use the time span between when all the ballots would be coming in. I would already have gone to press with the January, February issue. So the March, April issue was always our readers poll results issue. And we would highlight. And album art is, you know, with rock and roll in general, in all forms of music, but the album art became like a specific, especially when vinyl was big, because it was 12 inches by 12 inches. It can be something to look at and hold as you put the vinyl on and drop the needle. You know, you're looking at the artwork and stuff. And you know, there was a lot of great artwork. One of the things about Tooth and Nail Records that was cool, to put the spotlight on them, is Brandon Evil's focus was always finding new bands that were good and putting quality artwork together with it. That was like one of his standards. And every Tooth and Nail release, pretty much every single one, has some really cool artwork.
Yeah.
And, seeing all those back to back, hundreds of releases they've done. That was always a really good attitude, I thought, for his company to make that a priority, and it showed. And then, of course, Ryan Clark of Demon Hunter and his brother had a graphic design company, which he still runs today, which is as successful or more successful than Demon Hunter as a band is. And they just put out pristine, killer artwork. It's just very inspiring and cool. I always like that Vengeance Rising Human Sacrifice album cover, which is Bob Beeman's hand posed for that photo with the giant stake coming out of the palm of his hand.
Yep.
I thought it was cool that Guardian's Buzz album had like 4 different covers, had like Buzz as one, and it had a bunch of bees as one. And you know, some of those Zao covers, there was a guy named Bruce Haven, who was a Christian artist in Southern California, that one of the guys who worked for me was friends with him. And Bruce Haven was like getting contracted to do Kit Kat candy bar ads for major magazines, and we got him to do the cover of the Heaven's Metal hard music compilation, Cool Crown of Thorns. But he did some really cool artwork for some Tooth and Nail releases and stuff. Trying to remember some that just really stood out or really got talked about a lot. Nothing comes to mind as far as, oh yeah, I'll never forget this reaction from the fans for this album cover. I have my own favorites, and like I said, we had that as a part of the readers poll every year, and people would kind of get into it, and there'd be a lot of votes for album covers, and lyrics were always fun. I I remember like sometime Sunday got in trouble for cussing. I think
Yep.
the word ass
I
and
remember that.
bonus
Sometime Sunday.
and
Yes.
cop flack over that. I always loved the lyrics of Mark Solomon, the singer for the Crucified, who went on to become the singer for Stavesacre, one of my favorite bands. Some of those lyrics are just so heartfelt and just kind of speaks for a generation in a lot of ways. I remember Stavesacre shows and that song like At the Moment and I Will Live, people just raising their hands at the right moment and just kind of worshiping God and praying out loud for those lyrics. It was like church service.
Yeah.
You know, and Stavesacre wasn't a very religious band that was always preaching on stage and stuff, but their lyrics were just honest, heartfelt, I would say spirit inspired, and you know, genuine lyrics from an artist that I admire and appreciate that. There's been a lot of thinkers over the years, you know, that put a lot of thought into their lyrics. It was always cool see bands like POD to turn a clever line, or even Striper through the years who are still at it.
Yeah.
I got another question for you, Doug. Talking about, I guess, the first wave of bands coming back, and then like in the early 2000s, and then now there's the second wave, like Becoming Archetype coming back. What were some of the bands that you were excited that were coming back during that first wave that came back, and you were just excited to see them, and maybe you wrote articles about it, and then now bands that you're excited that have made a comeback?
That's a good question. It's cool to see, you know, Becoming the Archetype coming back for sure. Like right now, like just released an album this summer or coming up in September, maybe. I don't remember when it drops.
I think it just dropped last week, actually. Dropped Friday.
It did.
It's fresh new music from BTA. Awesome. I don't know. It was really cool for the transition Living Sacrifice made when DJ left the band and Bruce took over vocals. That Reborn album was mind blowing and epic in a lot of ways. You know, I have an affinity for 80s metal, so I like when some of the bands like, you know, Blood Good came back. They didn't really disappear, but didn't make a lot of noise for a while.
Right.
You know, Fox joined the band and had great songs like Pray in it. And I don't know, there's just so much good music out there. Like, you know, Neil Morris and Theocracy, so many exciting bands on a lot of different genres. It's always cool to see a band come back. You know, like my own band, Lust Control, is kind of stuck around, and we're just all friends and kind of making music because we want to, kind of thing. It's kind of fun to see that happen. And some of the old Tooth and Nail bands have done that not too long ago.
Wow. Yeah. Coming right up, a couple of questions about Lust Control. But first, you were talking, you mentioned Blood Good, and then you also talked about that reader's poll. I remember for years, and you all even joked about it and said these guys should make a band. The best guitarist for years award went to Gary Lanier. Favorite bassist award for years went to Steve Rowe. Favorite vocalist for years went to Dale Thompson, and favorite drummer for years went to Ted Kirkpatrick. And I remember you all saying they should make a band together, and you know that was kind of hilarious. But you know, we know that we lost Ted and Michael recently, like pretty much within weeks of each other, and we also lost a few other people. But I know that Ted and Michael had been around for so long and have been such big innovators in Christian metal, in thrash metal and in power metal, classic metal, respectively. But yeah, so let's talk about them for a minute.
Yeah, it's a tough loss. You know, as believers, we grieve, but we grieve as those who have hope. You know, knowing that they're still alive. So it's one of the things I do is I talk about them in present tense. Like Ted Kirkpatrick is a great guy. Michael Bloodgood is a sweetheart. Not was, but is. They're still around. They're just not here on planet Earth anymore in their physical bodies. And man, it was such a sad thing to see Michael, his band Bloodgood did a concert in Cincinnati on, I think, a Saturday night. And on Monday, he was still in Cincinnati and had this massive hemorrhage in his brain, had like a stroke. He never got home.
Right.
One of the things that would bug me if I was sick is I want to go home. I want to be in Austin, or I don't want to be in Florida or California while I'm sick. And so he was never able to go home, and that was really sad. And it was kind of shocking that I got a text from his son Paul, who lives here in Austin, that said, "I lost my dad and my best friend today." And I was like shocked. I thought he was getting better. I thought he was making progress, and he was doing some therapy on trying to heal. And but yeah, Michael Bloodgood is a pastor of a Calvary Chapel church, or did, and just one of my favorite people to interview over the years. I remember just talking about things, asking questions like, "Why do you think so many Christian metal musicians are charismatic in the faith? And what is your favorite food?" And he goes, "Well, I'm very fond of large Frosties at Wendy's." And he was always kind of had his head screwed on straight. They traveled with their wives and their families on tour to motorhome, and
Wow. Hold on. Interesting.
Thing, not splitting their family apart, but keeping it together. And just all of his sons got involved in ballet, like professional ballet. His son Paul in Austin was like the lead role in the Nutcracker. He was always the guy on the posters and stuff for a 15 or more year career as a professional ballet dancer. And all of his three sons, they all have been professional dancers. And because his oldest son lived in Austin, he would come to town to see him a lot. And so I get to see Michael quite frequently. It was always a joy to spend time with him. And Ted Kirkpatrick, super sweet guy. As many people know, he was a butterfly collector. One time he flew me out to LA. He lived in Santa Monica, really close to the beach, in an apartment. And he had all this giant dresser on against a wall with drawers. You pull out these glass encased things with all these butterflies. He had this one drawer that had like this tarantula. It was like a 9 or 12-inch span of its legs. It was like creepy. It's like, okay, please shut that door again, Ted. I'm going to be scared sleeping here tonight because of that. But Ted was one of those guys that was just so talented. He almost made people sick because he was good at everything. He was a good-looking guy. He was smart. He was successful at a business. He could go to a carnival and win you stuff. He could go to the knock down the Cupid dolls. He could go to whatever event it was. He just had the athletic and musical talent just coming out of his pores. Amazing, gifted guy, and very innovative, doing stuff different. Like he took a stand for animals when no one else did, which was really cool. And was one of those people that stayed in the faith. It's kind of sad when we see some artists that we admire walk away from the Lord, or just get depressed and just leave the faith. And Ted stayed, and it's like Michael Bloodgood stayed. They were like real stalwarts and straight up guys that were good to be around. And it was so sad. I didn't know Ted was sick. He was like the epitome of health. He stayed in good health. I think he played tennis with his wife Christy a lot. So it was a shocker to see him go just about a week and a half ago, I guess.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, much love to all Tourniquet and Bloodgood fans and supporters, and also Ted and Michael's families, man. Like, for real, much love to them. I have a couple of questions about lust control, but I'm gonna let Dustin ask one first, and then we're gonna dive into this article.
Well, leading into, I would just say, present day, and like I said, we'll get those links and everything from you, podcasts, whatever, and we can put in the interview later on. We have, Jay, wouldn't you say at least over 150 bands and artists and musicians in the group?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. What would you say to, and besides everything that you've already mentioned, Doug, what would you say to these new bands and new musicians in the group as a challenge, as I guess would say more of a spiritual road paver as yourself that you've noticed? What would you say to challenge them in their Christian walk as a musician and as a pastor when they're ministering out on the road?
Good question. Thanks for the opportunity to somebody allows me permission to speak into their life. I would say, first of all, be appreciative and grateful to God for the gifts and the talents you have, and keep working and pursuing and improving those talents. Practice, get better, and keep um, write stuff that's from the heart, that's from the real. Like people, like when you speak, they may not remember the scriptures you share, but they'll remember the stories you tell. And Jesus used stories a lot, illustrations. Um, so keep mining the harvest of your heart, and think about what God's shown you, because when something is personal and you share it, it usually has a bigger impact because it means more to the messenger because it's coming from you. So I would say pursue your craft, pursue feeding people good food. There's so much to choose from on the internet now. There's like a billion bands out there. There's songs just floating out there in the ether space. And so what's to make somebody give you a chance? You have to stand out. And when you do get the chance for have somebody to hear your music, if you can leave them with something that actually helps them, how cool is that? How possibly making a difference for eternity. You can. If you share the right word at the right time to the right person, you can change their life.
Yeah.
And, so remembering that music is an opportunity to do that, pursue that, try to strive for that. And also remember that your identity is in Christ. Your name has been written in the Lamb's Book of Life.
Amen.
You shouldn't rejoice so much over the fact that demons, can get bossed around by you and can leave as you tell them to leave in the name of Jesus. But as Jesus said, when the disciples were coming back 2 by 2, even the demons obey us. They were excited. Jesus kind of put it in perspective. He didn't say, "Hey, calm down, don't smile." He didn't say that, but he says, rejoice that your names are written in the Lamb's Book of Life.
Yeah.
That is your identity, and you are made in the image of God, and being redeemed by God. You're part of His family. You're part of the bride of Christ. So don't ever forget to whom you belong to. Also, how many times have we heard people belittle the church or bag on the church or say negative things about the wife of Jesus Christ? He's coming back and marry her. And you talk about a dude's wife, you might get that guy kind of angry. So
that's right.
I don't want to, move you with fear, but just remember that you're part of the bride, and that Jesus loves you, and He loves the people that you don't agree with that are still part of your family. That can be tough sometimes to live out, but Jesus ascended to heaven and He left the whole kingdom with 12 dudes, and it multiplied, and here we are, 21 centuries later, and it's still happening, it's still growing.
Yeah.
So there's something about that, and we were made for community, not to go out and be with God in the woods. We're kind of geared and crafted for community.
Wow.
So there's what I would encourage or challenge Christian musicians with. And like I said, I started off with gratitude and thanksgiving. Thank God for the gift you have and the opportunity to play, and just the joy that comes from music is really a cool thing.
True. Absolutely. So I spoke about a little article earlier. I just finally remember some of these articles. It's pretty crazy. But this article that you wrote, I don't know, maybe in 20 years ago or something like that. But the article was entitled, "I Was in Lust Control." And I think at that time, lust control wasn't doing it that much. So you could say it in the past tense at that time. But yeah, and you went through this whole explanation about how lust control happened and, your part in it and lyrics. And I remember I remember seeing Lust Control albums and looking at the ads and different magazines and stuff, but I actually hadn't listened that much to the band until I saw that article. I think I immediately went out and bought "We Are Not Ashamed," WANA, off of that, and it cracked me up, dude. The album was so freaking hilarious. And I think soon after that, you all released "Feminazi" on tape, and I still own that too. So yeah, like I said, that article exists, but it's been a while. So let's talk about that. And I also might as well, while you're doing that, talk about some of Lust Control's most controversial songs. I remember one of the big subjects that you all tackled was masturbation. I'm saying that in the Christian Male interview. Masturbation is artificial sex, you know. So the Big M was the name of the song. You also talked about the charismatic movement on the song, speaking in tongues, and talked about some scripture in that. There were quite. Oh, I remember you all actually did a cover, if I'm not mistaken, of "I Blew Up the Clinic Real Good." Was that y'all? Y'all
Yeah,
did, right?
I was on.
Mm-hmm. So so let's talk about the history and maybe some of the more controversial moments. I think you all were banned at some Christian stores and stuff or whatever. Like, what's the deal?
Yeah, funny. That article came out in '94. I think it was the issue with Tourniquet on the cover, and had an article about the Northwest scene that was exploding at the time with Blenderhead and Sometimes Sunday and all those bands up there near Seattle and Portland. I think that's where I took the mask off. And what's funny is our guitar player quit, and we tried to replace him, and it just didn't work out. And so the band just kind of went our separate ways. We all stayed friends with each other and lived in the same Austin area. But I went over to Australia to do a Lust Control tour, and this guy booked a couple of shows, and he had 3 musicians learn a 19-song set. And I flew over there, and it was the Australian version of Lust Control, but we all wore ski masks. So really nobody was wiser, except for the people that knew the dudes or whatever. Got to do a couple of shows, speak at some school, do radio station interviews. And that was kind of my last hurrah with Lust Control. And I wrote that article. I think I had a picture of me holding a koala bear, because I just come back from Australia. And so, 17 years later, we get back together in 2011 or 2010, and we played Cornerstone Festival, I guess, in 2012. No, that was 2011. Anyway, so a lot of fun. When Lust Control came out, we kind of started as a joke. We decided to just put a cassette tape out there in the Christian music underground, and we called our first album "This Is a Condemnation," and it had him on there. And this big distributor called Spring Arbor, they bought like 400 copies of that. And the day that it arrived in the warehouse, everybody in the warehouse was calling each other on the intercom. Did you see item number 223? Is that really the title of that? Oh my gosh! And the vice president of sales called Mike Delaney, who's a true hero of Christian rock and roll, because he was a music buyer for Spring Arbor, and he would buy all these cool, radical, independent Christian bands' music and distribute it. So bookstores all across the world, but mostly America, could get all this stuff from unsigned bands that were just as good as some of the signed bands. Anyway, the VP of sales called him in and said, "You have to return this. We can't sell this." And so, he tucked his tail between his legs and he called me on the phone and said, "Hey, Doug, I'm really sorry, but I have to return all these. Is there anything I can do for you?" And I said, "Actually, Mike, there is. You guys have a flyer program where every Spring Arbor shipment that comes has flyers promoting products. I want a Heaven's Metal magazine flyer in the next, flyer program." And those flyers became such a hit that the magazine buyer said, "Can I take this title on?" And Mike was like, "Yeah." And so that's when Heaven's Metal went from dealing directly with about 24 bookstores around the world to hundreds of bookstores.
Wow.
Spring Arbor. So that was a big bump in Heaven's Metal magazine because of this problem with Lust Control and being banned. John Thompson, who has got a really cool podcast called True Tunes, he had a store called True Tunes, which was run by a bunch of nuns near the Moody Bible Institute in Chicago. And they sold our tape, but they sold it in a brown paper bag. And people would come in, "Hey, you got that monkey tape?" Yeah. They sell brown paper bag for real.
Wow, that's funny.
So that was very funny. We had a concert booked in Minnesota, and the pastor's wife of this mega church who sponsored this Christian club called the New Union read the article in their newspaper about Lust Control and said, "Oh, we can't have this band here. I forbid it. They're just not. You can't have the band with the name Condom in it coming to our club." So they had to cancel that show, but the plane tickets were already bought. So he booked a show for us at a teen club in Fridley, Minnesota, and then we played a show in Wilmar, which is an hour or two away. So we kind of got in trouble in some ways for stuff like that. And the Big M was my guitar player, who was we went by our middle names in the band, but it's Paul Stanley Kupek, who's One Bad Pig and had a solo career. he goes, I'm going to write a song about masturbation. I'll call it the Big M. And before he could show up at practice the next week with the Big M, I'd written the lyrics out. And so I presented it, and we went with my version, which was masturbation is artificial sex. It's the chorus. And it became a rallying cry. And one of the things I took seriously from that moment on was to address sexuality from a biblical viewpoint, because our culture, the whole Western world, is sexually drunk. And then we get messages bombarded from every media everywhere with some twisted messages about sex. And so for us to speak boldly about it from a biblical viewpoint was something nobody else was doing. It was like sex was a controversial hush hush. We're not going to talk about it in church. We need to talk. We need to talk about it.
Absolutely.
But we need to have some conversations so people get some edification or information about it coming from the Bible, at least one source. So I always took that seriously and would always preach at our shows, even at bars and stuff in and around. But it was it's been kind of fun. We're working on a new album right now. And one of the songs is about running from temptation. I wanted to write something that was classic lust control. That kind of, sometimes you actually have to do the embarrassing thing, which may involve putting on your tennis shoes and running out of a party, running down the street, running away, whatever it takes. Sometimes you just got to run. But so look for some new music in the early part of next year, maybe.
Okay, cool, awesome. Go ahead, Dustin. I just got one more question.
Question to piggyback on Jay's question with lust control. So, like I said, I was really, really young. I was like 2 years old during this time in the 80s. Was there anyone like maybe a Steve Taylor or someone like that was breaking down walls that helped you guys be able to feel like, hey, I want to write this, I want to promote this because this is going on, and because that person opened that door, now I can open it, I can kick it open with lust control? Like, was there anyone during that time that you would say, as a reporter or a music fan, eventually a singer and a writer, was there anyone that you noticed that was like, thank you for opening those doors?
Yeah, Steve Taylor was certainly one of those guys. He had a song called Whatever Happened to Sin. He called it an alternative lifestyle, huh? Morality lies within. And some of his lyrics would definitely push the boundaries and was able to bring up controversial subjects. And so one of the things with lust control, which was kind of fun for a young 20-something-year-old, was to kind of push the boundaries even more, to be as controversial as possible, not for the sake of being controversial, but shock value has its own merits and has its own strength. But and then Andy McCarroll and Mobile Support was this kind of a new wavy quasi punk band out of England. They had a song called Sin, and the chorus was like sin, sin, sin. I want to hate it, and even that was bold, because a lot of people, Christian artists, didn't sing about blunt subjects as much, and so yeah, there's a lot of first kick down back in the 80s. It was fun to be a part of it, and punk rock kind of caters to that, just the same way heavy metal kind of caters to singing about epic dramatic stories like the fiction or biblical stories.
Opening the doors from what you were just talking about to the early 2000s, when the lyrics and music shifted, where they no longer mentioned, you probably talked about this in HM magazines, but when the lyrics shifted to no longer when they were mentioning the name of Jesus, but they were talking about him. What were your thoughts on that? I don't know if you ever wrote anything on that, or was there any articles you wrote on that?
Well, I have a broader appreciation for just a wide span of communication. There's lots of ways to get people to think. I kind of came back to Christ in the college environment, and so college students like to talk about intellectual things or philosophies, or and they like to debate subjects. And so at that age, new ideas are expressed. You hear different philosophies and different ideas from different people, and you learn to be tactful, and you learn to be to try to disarm your critics, or at least to get heard. But if you're just a bullhorn sending out slogans and trite phrases and things that are true but aren't really going to help somebody because it's just it falls on deaf ears or it seems trite or cliche. So you get pushed to be more creative. You get pushed to try to make people think. And so I always applauded that and left room for that. I didn't want to be I was, Heaven's Metal was never the moral police. I think we have an obligation to kind of share from our hearts. If we really felt there was something worth addressing, then we did. One of those times was when Roger Martinez flip-flopped and went from being a pastor at a Christian church that was straight up and theologically correct to a satanic atheist. We had to, because he was part of our scene, he was like a major player, we had to address that. And so we prayerfully addressed that from several different viewpoints, from Glenn Kaiser's interview to Pastor Bob's column to the back page to the interview I did with him. And so, sometimes there was times where we stood up and said, this is something we need to discuss. This is a topic that's bothering us or some people, and we're going to address it. We were willing to do that and be bold about that, but certainly didn't want to be just like church lady and say, well, isn't that special? That's of Satan. If I don't understand it, it's obviously of Satan. I didn't want to be closed-minded like that. So because I was more open-minded or broader or promoted thinking, some people that had really closed-minded ideas about a certain subject may have thought I was, losing it, or may have thought I was too liberal. But I'm a pretty conservative guy politically and theologically, so it's kind of funny. But when you have a crowd of people, especially with the internet, and you've got the ability to comment on stuff with anonymously, it makes discourse and debate sometimes mean-spirited. And I like to promote civility and being nice to each other, even if we disagree.
Yeah, I love that because like I said, I mean, when I think about like the vague lyrics, people talking about like what Under Oath was doing or what some of these other bands were doing. I mean, that debate as far as Christian music and lyrics, really, I think one of the biggest times for it was the 80s with Amy Grant, Michael W. Smith, and BB and CC Winans. Like, I remember those three were definitely like scapegoats for all of that. So a lot of times when people say, all these Christian artists are being so vague in their music, I'm like, you must not have been around the 80s. Lord, I remember BB and CC definitely caught a lot of flack for their lyrics back then.
Yeah.
Now they're still major to this day in Christian music, but they're most seen as like some, just legends. Same with Amy Grant and Michael W. Smith, for sure. So my last question for you anyway, is what was it like to write? I know you worked with quite a few artists on the side, like, as you were editing and stuff like that. One artist that I finally remember you writing a song with is Mortification. You wrote Mephibosheth with Steve Rowe.
Yeah.
Tell us about that experience. And that's pretty much my last thing. And then Dustin, he can take it away, whatever he wants to do.
Well, that was really fun. That happened in Australia when I was over there one time. I got to visit there twice. And this was the time that I did those shows. I think I spent 2 weeks in Australia. The first week was over in Perth and did those concerts. And then I flew over to Melbourne where Steve lives. And I went with Mortification and did a couple concerts to the Black Stump Festival, which is like the cornerstone of Australia. Mm-hmm. And, he sings death metal and there's a growling voice, destroy behold, destroy behold. Voices that there's a story in the Bible, Steve, about Mephibosheth, and just that name itself, it'd be a great death metal song. Mephibosheth, blood pumping. And so in the van right there, we just broke it down and wrote the song kind of on the spot. And I still get royalty checks for like $3, 25 cents every couple of years for that song. But I really love that story because, Jonathan and David made a covenant with each other, and Mephibosheth wasn't even around to be a part of that covenant, but he got to benefit from all the benefits of that covenant that his dad made. So when his dad died, And David searched out for anybody in Jonathan's house that he could show kindness to, which was his covenant he made with Jonathan. He told Mephibosheth, "You're here. All the land of your grandfather Saul is yours. You can eat at the king's table every day. You know, you don't have to be afraid." And he was probably afraid when he was in hiding, because on the day that Jonathan died, Mephibosheth, the castle of the king, they were running around trying to escape, because surely David was going to come in and slaughter everybody. Because when the new king took over, when the old king died, they killed all the family members, so nobody could have a rightful heir to the throne. And servants dropped Mephibosheth probably on a stone floor, and he broke his legs, and he's crippled for life. And he was in hiding. He probably heard the messages, you know, "You're the true king. This David guy's an imposter. You're the inheritor of the kingdom, and if David ever finds you, he's going to kill you." And so one day men show up and say, "Mephibosheth, you're coming to Jerusalem to see David." He probably thought he was going to get killed, but instead of being killed, he got the benefits of being one part of the kingdom. And he didn't have anything to do with that covenant, but he got to receive all the benefits of that covenant. That's the same with Jesus and the covenant Jesus made with man, that his blood was spilled to pay for our forgiveness and becoming holy. And we get to all the benefits of that covenant just by all Mephibosheth had to do is say, "Okay, I'll take that." That's all I have to do is say, "Okay, I'll take your forgiveness, God." And so it was just a great story, and I'm really, really, I love that song, and thanks for bringing it up. I like to tell that story to people.
Yeah, awesome. Justin, you got anything else, Doc?
Yeah, so I've got 3 last questions for you, Doug, and I'll make them really quick. What would you say, like, because Ted is gone now in heaven and Michael is gone in heaven, just looking back at start to finish the entire metal scene and moving forward, what are some albums that you feel have aged very well and they don't feel like they've aged at all?
Well, that's easy. The Blood Good Detonation album is fantastic, and so even select cuts from the debut album by Blood Good. Tourniquet's second and third album, Psychosurgery and Pathogenic Ocular Dissonance, totally stand the test of time. Almost any Demon Hunter album stands the test of time. That Rage of Angels album stands the test of time. I still listen to it a lot. Guardians, Miracle Mile, and Fire and Love, and Buzz, and Bottle Rocket. Those 4 albums stand the test of time. Stripers to Hell with the Devil stands the test of time. When I did a list of the top 100 Christian rock albums of all time for our 25th anniversary issue, I had 5 criteria for what caused an album to be on that list. 1, I had to like it, obviously a personal thing. 2, it had to be great, it had to push boundaries of excellence. 3, it had to be classic. You know, it still stands the test of time. You still listen to it today and it sounds as fresh as ever. You know, 4, it had to be historic, and 5, it had to be popular. It had to sell a lot. So any one of those by itself was not enough to put you on the list. But if all 5 of those factors were involved, albums like Vengeance Rising, Human Sacrifice, POD's Satellite album, and even The Choir, Chase the Kangaroo. So many. There's an album, the older album by John Mailer, this guy who played in the early Christian rock albums with Calvary Chapel on the West Coast. He had a solo album called Bow and Arrow. Check that out. It's like time, kind of an art, part commercial rock thing. I could go on and on and on because there's so many good albums. Like when I did that list of 100 albums, I first get about 500 that all deserve to be on it. I had to whittle that down to 100. It was difficult. You know, how do you say no to this album? Well, you take those 5 factors and you whittle it down. You compare it to this album. Okay, this one goes on. That was very, very difficult. There's so much good art that was made, especially in this era between the late 70s and the early 2010s.
Awesome. So my second to last question. Today, right now, who are you listening to?
Well, I have my iPhone on shuffle. So I have about 10,000 songs on my iPhone. And the awesome thing about it is I only put great songs on there. So I didn't hire out like some albums. I only have the songs that I think are great on there. So But anyway, if I'm on shuffle on my iPhone and all the songs are great, every song I listen to is great. I'm listening to a lot of Demon Hunter, most of their melodic stuff. Listen to, because I'm on shuffle, I get a steady diet of a lot of the bands that I have multiple albums of, like Stavesacre, the Speakeasy album, love that. Every song on it, and almost anything in the King's X catalog. They didn't release an album which I don't really listen to anymore ever, but all their other albums are just like stellar. This band called Brother Kane, which had 3 albums on Virgin Records, the singer Damon Johnson
you did an interview with them once, right?
He's a believer. So I really like that stuff. Just got the new Skillet album a couple weeks ago, giving that a spin. I love Around the World and Back by Theocracy on their Ghost Ships album. And The Wonder of It All, those 2 songs. I drool when
they're in our group. That's awesome.
What?
They're in our group.
Yeah, it's a great band. I can't wait for them to come out with a new album. I haven't heard anything about that, so I hope something's coming down the pike soon.
Awesome. So my last and final question, before we say the big thank you for allowing us to interview you and the blessing of it with over an hour of questions, what are you doing now? Like, where can we find what you're doing, and how, if fans want to reach out to you, where are you available?
Well, cool. Thanks for asking. I have a group of like 10 like-minded guys that we call the Heavens Metal Crew, and we're like all editors for heavensmetalmagazine.com. And so the Heavens Metal still goes on today, but it's like a web magazine. So you've got feature articles, you've got album reviews, and you've got news posts. And there's, like I said, a group of 10 or 12 of us, and we write when we feel like writing. We don't have deadlines anymore. We're not doing this as a job. It's just a hobby. So it's infrequent. It comes in waves. Sometimes there's like 5 news posts in one day. Sometimes there's like 1 a week. But that's heavensmetalmagazine.com. I do a video blog. I try to do it once a week. Sometimes I'm good about that. Sometimes I slack off, but that's you go to YouTube and you search Sanctuary International Matrix, and they have like over a dozen playlists. My playlist is called Heavens Metal with Doug Van Pelt. So I don't know how many videos I've got on there, maybe close to 100. I haven't counted, but I do those. I've written some books. I've got Rock Stars on God, Volume 2. I wrote a novel about high school football and time travel, which is like dear to my heart. It's a story about me and growing up in high school in Southern California and time travel, going back in time. It's called Desert High. I got a children's book called Bobby Baby Bear, and I have like a line of books called HM Press, and I got one of my dad's books called Flying Tales. He's a U.S. Air Force fighter pilot, test pilot. And I've got an audiobook where he tells the stories. And then I'm writing a couple more children's books. I got one called A Football Tale, and I've got another one called Eeny, Meeny, Miny, Mo, about a family of martin birds. What else am I working on? I'm working on a book called Heavens Metal, Worship the Full Volume, which is like a story of like, I take like the classic seminal bands and do career spanning interviews with each of them. So there'll be like maybe a dozen to 20 different interviews in that book. Worship the Full Volume. Hopefully that'll come out in the next year and a half or so. I've got one interview with Glenn Kaiser of Resband. It's a video interview that's on the Heavens Metal Magazine website. Here, and that's going to be the chapter on Resband. And I'm looking to interview Ulf Christensen of Jerusalem, and then tons of bands. White Cross, Bloodgood. Not sure how I'm going to get an interview on Tourniquet now. Might have to go to talk to some past members, but that's a project I'm working on. And but my regular gigs, I work for the state of Texas. I do graphic design for the Department of Licensing and Regulation here in Austin. Elwin Lust Control. We're still together. The band has been rehearsing once a week for 2 years writing this material, and they brought me in last January and said, "Okay, Doug, we've got the songs written. Now we need the lyrics." And so for the last 9 months, we've been putting the lyrics to music and getting that ready. And Paul Rohrbach, or PJ Bostic, who's a great prog rock musician himself, he's got a studio. We're going to record half of this album at his place. in January.
Interesting. He's in Seattle. Is he still in Seattle?
Now he moved from Seattle to Austin about 30 years ago.
Okay. Oh wow.
Yeah.
Okay, so when I come to Austin, I know where to record. Okay.
There you go.
Awesome.
Well, thanks, guys. It's been a
Cool,
joy.
man. No, thank you, man.
Thank you.
You're a legend, and I think that it's fair to say that our group would be a lot less people and would have a lot less reach without the foundation that people like you have laid, for sure.
Well, it was a blessing. I was just so grateful because it was like a dream come true. It was like my baby, and it was like my ministry, and it was like my career, all those things. And I woke up every day feeling like I didn't have a job because I get to do this, and it was fulfilling. I felt like I was doing what I was created to do, and it was a season of 28 years. It was very blessed, and I would totally do it all over again. It was a privilege, and I hope to be involved with you guys, and just appreciate having the group and chime in. And
absolutely,
it's great.
Oh, cool.
Thank you so much, man. We appreciate, and we'll definitely, all of us will be reading up on what you guys are doing next. We're excited for it.
Cool. Thanks in the chat soon.
Absolutely. God bless you. Thank you again. Good night, good day, wherever you are in the world. Peace out.
Yeah. Peace out, man. God bless you guys.